Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
What really defines growth is the decisions made in boardrooms up and down the country. It's CFOs asking, can we afford to invest? Can we afford to expand? Can we afford to take a chance on people? Well, after the budget, the answer we're hearing from so many firms is not yet. The rise in national insurance, the stark lowering of the threshold, caught us all off guard. Along with the expansion and the rise of the national living wage and the potential cost of the Employment Rights Bill, they put a heavy burden on business.
That was the CEO of the Confederation of British Industry, Rain Newton-Smith, with her verdict on the government. Caught by surprise, should her lobby group have been making their interests known a bit sooner? Hello, you're listening to Bloomberg UK Politics. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Lizzy Burden. Welcome to the programme. So it wasn't long ago, Caroline, that Rachel Reeves was at Mansion House at the heart of the City of London and proclaiming it as the crown jewel of the British economy. But if we look at the findings released by the CBI this morning, it doesn't look like business is feeling too wooed. In fact, they're saying that almost half of their members are in damage control mode and preparing to slash jobs. And more than that, 6 in 10 businesses surveyed predict that the government budget isn't going to increase the country's investment appeal. You heard Rain Newton-Smith there, the CBI CEO, laying the blame squarely at the feet of the government and citing tax hikes in particular. But as you say, I really do have to wonder whether the lobby groups need to look closer to home, because while they were scrambling to win the new government's ear, did they miss the boat to influence this once-in-a-parliament budget? They're all competing for membership fees, but what's the point of paying membership fees if a lobby group isn't bold enough to stand up for your interests, especially on tax? And ultimately, was the CBI too distracted by having to rehabilitate its own image?
OK, well, look, we'll debate that point. It might be a bit harsh, but having said that, the business interests of Britain are certainly making their voices heard now. You might say adding to the chorus of business discontent because of Reeves's policies. They're seemingly here to stay. So what next then? The chief economist of the CBI, Louise Hellum, was speaking to me earlier today on Bloomberg Radio. She says that if the budget is all the bad news, i.e. all the bad news now, hopefully then things can get more optimistic going forwards. Particularly, she said, if there is more tech adoption around AI in particular, that's going to be paramount for businesses to develop, grow and therefore absorb all of these costs. So I wonder if that can shift the dial.
Well, let's discuss now with Bloomberg's UK business reporter Sabah Meddings. She was in the room for Rain Newton-Smith's speech and she's hot-footed it back to the studio. Thank you, Sabah. What was the atmosphere in the room? Are business leaders, angry at the government, do you think? Keir Starmer, I remember the last time, was a rock star.
Yeah, it's definitely a different feeling. I remember being at Keir Starmer's keynote speech and there was a kind of a standing ovation quite early on. I have to say we haven't yet heard from the senior cabinet minister who's appearing later on. But yeah, there's been a lot of, you've seen it every day in the papers, different CEO talking about the cost of the budget. This national insurance change did catch them all by surprise, and they're not even privately saying, we had a lot of earnings in the last few weeks and, there was tens of millions of pounds from all the retailers who, let's not forget, who the much bigger employers, they are more affected by the changes than some in the city. People are furious. Up to the election, there was a lot of courting of business and lots of people were invited in, all these receptions, this smoked salmon scrambled egg brigade, as I think it was called.
Everyone in a tie in the city treated to that.
Exactly, and people were talking really positively about the government, and now there's a real sense of betrayal.
There were 185 responses to this CBI survey. Put it into context, because we've also seen some very dire consumer and business confidence figures, and the GDP data in this last quarter was also incredibly flat, sluggish. So what do you make of the CBI's responses to their business survey?
Well, let's also remember it was at 185, but a lot of the CBI members are real big businesses.
Yes.
So it's kind of, it represents a real chunk of the UK's business community. Even today we had a new report from ASDA and the Centre for Economics and Business, which said that UK households are seeing their disposable income falling every week, and that is going to affect Christmas, which is clearly a really important trading quarter for most businesses. And, all this negative news that we've seen in the last few weeks, like you say, the inflation, rising energy bills, people are not going to have as much to spend at the same time as these businesses are having to push these extra costs, these extra employee costs through to customers. I mean, they'll sort of absorb as much as they can, but there's only so much the businesses can absorb, especially if they're low margin. So we are seeing that people are going to see this inflation creep back into supermarkets, which have been fighting quite hard to keep prices low.
This negative sentiment that we're seeing in the CBI survey, how much is that because of the tax rises in Rachel Reeves's budget? How much is it because of, for example, Donald Trump being re-elected and firms worried about the impact of tariffs?
It's still quite impossible to know. My guess is been reports over what type of tariffs we will see, but it's still very early to say. I think there was a report a couple of weeks ago that said the UK might be carved out, so who knows. We export £188.2 billion worth of exports to the US, so it is a huge trading partner for us. In total, I think it was a $300 billion between us and the US, sort of with imports as well. So it is a very critical trading partner, and there will be a lot of nervousness.
Did the CBI go to bat hard enough for business? That is surely going to be the question. Were they trying to make friends rather than influence people?
Well, I mean, that is a very good point. And, today's conference isn't like the conferences we've seen in the past. It's just one day. There are some good voices there, but does it have the big heavy hitters that we've seen previously? All that means that the CBI has been in rehabilitation mode. We had the big upset a couple of years ago, which led to the departure of its former Director General. And since then, the CBI has really been trying to get back in with government. We saw the shadow ministers pulling out of events. The CBI, it took several months for them even to get a meeting with a minister again. So, they have, in the run-up to the election, really been trying to get access to the government. And access is the key here. You've got to be invited in. You've got to be able to sort of make your opinions heard. And so the CBI, has it been as critical as it should have been? Who knows? We weren't in the meetings, but it's definitely been in rehabilitation. So that is a great question.
But do you think that the reason the CBI has possibly found its backbone now is because it thinks there's going to be a spring budget? Obviously, there's been all this speculation that the gilt market reaction has wiped out any headroom Rachel Reeves left herself in the budget. Phil Aldrich's been writing about it on our economics team. Do you think that they're worried she's going to break this promise to only have one budget a year, and maybe they know something we don't about tax rises coming in the spring?
Ray Newton-Smith did say the tax rises like this can never happen again. So she really has sort of set the stall and said, don't surprise us like this again.
In terms of what comes next, I mean, we've had the manifesto, we've talked about the run-up to the election, then the investment summit, then the budget and the Mansion House speech. Now we are promised the industrial strategy. But when we ask people about what might be in the industrial strategy to increase economic growth in Britain, the formula is far from certain, isn't it? What are we expecting from this industrial strategy? Will it really give us and give business the direction that it needs?
It's all a bit woolly, isn't it, so far? We've heard something about skills and making sure people are skilled up for the technology adoption that we'll need to have. This whole point on AI, making sure that businesses are sort of ready to adopt this new technology, which obviously they're hoping will help cut some costs that they've all been hit by with these new staff cost increases. And then also competition. I mean, Sarah Cardell from the CMA gave an interview last week where she's sort of saying, we're really behind the government's plan for growth. She said it again on stage today at the CBI. She says that they're going to focus on just truly problematic mergers. She wants to sort of open up. She wants people to come and speak to them, talk to them about growth. So there's a few things, but at this stage it's still quite unclear.
Well, just to bring it back to Donald Trump, if the UK has to compete with a lower tax environment in the US, and part of the growth picture is investment, we've had the head of the British Business Bank warning that the government could go further to encourage funds to invest more in UK assets. I wonder if that's something that business groups, lobby groups want. Do they actually want mandation to get more money into UK PLC?
Yeah, I guess it's this point of mandation or encouragement. There are plans to bring some local authority pension funds together to give them a sort of a bit more meat when they're investing, so that which should sort of encourage more investment into all equities, including the UK and infrastructure and things like that. But I think this whole forced investment isn't sitting very well with most of the investment community.
And the other point to make on this is, you mentioned skills. I mean, the workforce issue has also been very significant since the pandemic. We've had a huge increase in the number of people, or millions of people now claiming benefits. Some people, long-term sickness is an issue. We don't even know exactly how big that issue is because the data hasn't been very strong in terms of the employment figures, and that's something that the Bank of England and the ONS, particularly the ONS, are working on. There's something of a drive to get kind of the workforce back into jobs. How successful might the Labour government be? What do the plans look like?
Well, I mean, that's another interesting sort of point of the CBI survey. They're sort of saying that businesses don't feel confident to take a chance on people, which is really what we need, to get people back into work who haven't worked for a while, who have been long-term sick. You need someone to take a chance on them. So, is that under threat now with businesses not feeling that they've got the money to invest, to take chances, to grow their workforces? There needs to be something. Businesses are asking for something that would help, whether it's sort of occupational health or something like that, to get more people back into work.
Something. Anything. It's been there. It's an intractable problem since the start of the pandemic. Sabah Meddings, thank you so much for updating us, and we will wait for the rest of that conference to bring you more on what exactly the business lobby wants from the government.
Yeah, it's surprising, isn't it, that we were waiting, we were hoping, and people thought that there would be stability out of this new government, but actually it's been pretty disappointing for business in the opening months, and especially since that surprising budget increase in taxation. Business is not that happy.
Too optimistic, perhaps.
Well, that's it from us for today. If you like the programme, don't forget to subscribe and give it 5 stars so that other people can find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify or wherever you listen.
This episode was produced by Tiwa Adebayo and our audio engineer was Sean Guastamakia. I'm Lizzy Burden.
And I'm Caroline Hepker. We'll be back with more tomorrow. This is Bloomberg.
Bloomberg UK Politics. Listen weekdays at noon on DAB Digital Radio in London.